The wind took everything, houses, memories, entire stories. But one single house remained standing, and inside it, something happened that people still call today the miracle of the Virgin Mary. But before we continue, leave a comment saying where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'd love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. You know, that neighbor everyone respects, but no one really knows? The one who waves from the porch, keeps the garden spotless, but rarely leaves the house? Dorothy Miller was that person. 72 years old, widowed for 5. She had lived in the same light blue wooden house for 45 years, since marrying Robert in 1979. It was a quiet coastal street where families knew each other by name, and children still played on the sidewalks until sunset. It was an ordinary house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a front porch with 2 rocking chairs that no longer rocked. The paint was peeling in some corners. The roof was 20 years old and probably needed replacing. Robert always said he would fix it, after retirement, after they saved some money, later. But Robert had a heart attack while repairing the backyard fence. And there was no later. Dorothy stayed in the house, alone. No children. They tried for years, but it never happened. No close family, just her memories, and a precise routine. Wake up at 6, coffee and toast, water the plants, watch the news, lunch at noon, read on the porch, dinner at 6, bed by 9, and pray. Every day at 3 in the afternoon, Dorothy would kneel in the corner of her living room where there was a small dark wooden table. On it stood a simple image of the Virgin Mary that had belonged to her grandmother, its colors faded by time. The Virgin wore a blue mantle and looked downward with a serene expression. Dorothy would light a candle, clasp her hands, and pray for 15 minutes, every single day, without fail. The neighbors knew it. Some thought it was beautiful, others thought old-fashioned. Tom Richardson, who lived 3 houses down, worked as a construction manager. 48 years old, pragmatic, straightforward. He and Dorothy had a cordial relationship. He mowed her lawn when it grew too tall, and she left cookies in his mailbox at Christmas. But Tom didn't understand religious devotion. Waste of time, he once told his wife, Karen. Karen, more diplomatic, just smiled, but she silently agreed. It was late August when everything changed. Dorothy was watering the petunias on her porch when she saw Tom walking quickly down the street, phone in hand. "Dorothy," he called, waving. "Did you see the alert?" She lowered the watering can. "What alert?" "Hurricane. Category 4, possibly 5. It's going to hit the coast in 48 hours. They're issuing a mandatory evacuation for the entire coastal area." Dorothy felt her stomach tighten slightly, but her face remained calm. "Mandatory?" "Mandatory," Tom repeated, stopping at her gate. "I've already called Karen. She's picking up the kids from school now. We're heading to the shelter inland. Do you have somewhere to go?" Dorothy looked at her house, at the windows through which she could see the living room, at the faded blue door that Robert had painted 2 weeks before he passed away. "I'm staying," she said simply. Tom blinked. "What do you mean, you're staying?" "Here, in my house." "Dorothy." Tom ran a hand through his hair, clearly trying to keep his patience. "It's not safe. They're predicting winds up to 250 kilometers per hour. This whole area will be devastated." "I know," Dorothy replied calmly. "Then why do you want to stay?" Dorothy looked at him with those soft gray eyes that always seemed to be watching something beyond what was visible. "This is my home, Tom. 45 years of memories. I won't abandon it all." "Dorothy, you wouldn't be abandoning it. You'd be protecting yourself." The gentleness in his voice was genuine. Dorothy noticed and appreciated it, but her decision was already made. "I'm staying," she repeated, "but thank you for caring." Tom looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're stubborn, you know that?" "Always have been." He sighed. "Dorothy, your house is the oldest on the street. Look at the roof. Look at the foundations. When the wind really hits, it'll be the first to fall." Dorothy just smiled. Maybe. Tom watched her for a few more seconds, clearly frustrated, then turned to leave. But he stopped halfway down the path and looked back. "At least promise me one thing. If you change your mind, call me. I'll come get you. There's still time." "Thank you, Tom, but I won't change my mind." That afternoon, at exactly 3 o'clock, Dorothy knelt before the image of the Virgin Mary as she always did. But this time, her prayer was different. "Mother," she whispered, hands clasped, eyes closed, "protect this house, not for me, but because it's all I have left of Robert. It's all I have." The candle flickered softly. The silence in the house was absolute. Dorothy opened her eyes and looked at the image. The Virgin Mary looked downward, serene, unchanging. Over the next 24 hours, the street turned into controlled chaos. Families loading suitcases into cars, children crying because they didn't want to leave their toys, men nailing boards over windows, women tying down whatever could be tied. Dorothy watched from the porch. Karen Richardson stopped in front of her house with her 2 children in the back seat of the SUV. "Dorothy, last chance. There's still room in the car." "Thank you, dear. I'm staying." "Dorothy, please." Karen's voice trembled slightly. "I don't want to come back and find—" "It'll be all right," Dorothy said with conviction. "I promise." But Karen didn't look convinced. She swallowed hard, waved, and drove away slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror until Dorothy was out of sight. Tom was the last to leave. He stopped his truck in front of Dorothy's house and got out, walked up to the porch with a serious expression. "You really won't change your mind?" "No." He shook his head, clearly torn between respecting her choice and the urge to just pick her up and put her in the truck. "Dorothy, I don't believe in God. You know that. But if there is one, I hope he's paying attention today, because you're going to need a miracle." Dorothy smiled gently. "Maybe I already have one." Tom took a deep breath. "Your house is going to collapse, Dorothy. The wind will tear off the roof. The walls will give in. This whole street will turn to rubble." "Maybe." "Not even your Virgin Mary will be able to hold back this wind." Dorothy didn't answer. She just kept smiling. Tom stood there for a few more seconds, then turned and left without looking back. The sound of his truck's engine faded into the distance, and then silence. The street was empty, all the houses boarded up, windows covered, cars locked in garages. It looked like a ghost town. Dorothy went inside and closed the door. The forecast said the hurricane would arrive at midnight. Dorothy made tea, sat in the living room, opened a book but couldn't read. The words danced on the page without meaning. She looked out the window. The sky was turning strange, a heavy yellowish color, as if the air itself were warning of something terrible. The birds were gone. There was no sound, no wind, no insects, just silence. Have you ever felt that kind of silence? The kind that isn't just the absence of sound, but the presence of something about to happen. At 8 o'clock that night, the wind began. Gentle at first, just a breeze that made the leaves of the trees dance. But within half an hour, it was stronger. In an hour, it was howling. Dorothy lit candles around the house. The power would soon go out. She gathered blankets. She did everything mechanically, as if she were preparing to go to sleep, not to face one of nature's most destructive forces. By 10 o'clock that night, the noise was deafening. The wind was no longer mere wind. It was a constant roar, as if a freight train were endlessly passing over the house. The windows rattled. The walls groaned. The roof moaned under the pressure. Dorothy sat on the living room floor, her back against the wall, rosary in hand, and she prayed. Hail Mary, full of grace. A massive crash. Something large, perhaps a tree, perhaps a piece of a neighbor's roof, slammed into the side of the house. Dorothy felt the vibration run through the floor. The Lord is with thee. Another crash. Breaking glass, but not from her house, somewhere nearby. Blessed art thou among women. The candlelight flickered violently. The wind was seeping in through some crack, though Dorothy couldn't tell from where. And blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. And then something strange happened. Amid the chaos, amid the deafening noise, Dorothy felt calm. It wasn't that the noise had lessened. It hadn't. It still raged, terrifying and merciless. But inside her, there was a stillness that made no sense. As if someone had placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "It's all right." Dorothy opened her eyes and looked at the image of the Virgin Mary in the corner of the room. The candle before it was still burning, its flame dancing, but not going out. And for a moment, just a moment, Dorothy could have sworn the Virgin's expression changed, as if she had looked at her and smiled. But when she blinked, the image was the same, serene, motionless, as it had always been. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. The hurricane raged on for hours. Dorothy lost all sense of time. It could have been 3 hours. It could have been 6. Everything blurred together. The noise, the darkness, the fear she kept locked deep inside, but that threatened to burst free. At some point she must have fallen asleep, because when she opened her eyes, sunlight was streaming through the window. Sunlight. Dorothy rose slowly, her joints protesting. She walked to the front window and looked outside, and what she saw made her heart stop. The street was destroyed. There was no other word. Destroyed. Trees torn out by the roots lying across the road, fallen utility poles, electric wires scattered like serpents, and the houses. My God, the houses. Tom Richardson's house, that beautiful 2-story home he had renovated the year before, had no roof. The second-floor walls had partially collapsed. Windows shattered. The garage completely gone. The house next door, the Morgans, was worse. An entire wall had fallen, exposing the interior like a dollhouse split open, furniture scattered, debris everywhere. 1, 2, 3. Dorothy counted silently. 20 houses on the street, and all were damaged or completely destroyed. Dorothy looked up at her own roof, intact. She looked at the walls, intact. She looked at the windows, intact. Not a single shingle out of place. Not a single crack in the walls. Not one broken pane of glass. It was impossible. Dorothy placed her hand over her chest, feeling her heart racing. She turned slowly, looking around the room. No damage. None. The pictures on the walls were still straight. The candles, now extinguished, remained in their places. The sofa, the coffee table, everything. Exactly where it should be, as if the hurricane had never happened. Except it had. The evidence was outside. Dorothy walked slowly to the corner of the room where the image of the Virgin Mary stood. The candle before it had burned out completely during the night, leaving only a small ring of wax on the plate. Dorothy knelt and wept. Not from fear, not from relief, but from something much greater, something she had no words to describe, gratitude, reverence, awe. "Thank you, my Virgin Mary," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." The Virgin Mary looked downward, serene, as always. But Dorothy knew, she knew with every fiber of her being. Something had happened in that house during the night. Something science could never explain, something skeptics would call impossible luck. But Dorothy knew the truth. She had been protected. The sound of an engine broke the morning silence. Dorothy stood and went to the window. A truck was moving slowly down the street, dodging fallen trees and debris. It was Tom. He climbed down from the truck and stood in the middle of the road, staring around in absolute shock. His house, his beautiful house, was in ruins. Then he looked toward Dorothy's house and froze. Even from inside, Dorothy could see his face, confusion, disbelief. As if he were seeing something his mind refused to process, he began walking toward her house, slowly, almost in a trance. Dorothy opened the door before he could knock. Tom stopped at the foot of the porch steps, looking up at the untouched roof, the perfect walls, the windows that hadn't even shuttered. How? His voice came out hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried again. How is this possible? Dorothy walked down the steps slowly and stood before him. I don't know, she said honestly. I only know I prayed, and the Virgin Mary heard me. Tom shook his head as if trying to shake the confusion away. Dorothy, I saw the reports. The eye of the hurricane passed exactly over this area. Winds of 160 miles per hour. Your house should be... He gestured toward the devastation around them. It should look like that. I know. But it doesn't. No. Tom looked at her, then at the house, then back at her. I don't understand. Neither do I, Dorothy admitted, but I don't need to. An SUV stopped just behind the truck. Karen jumped out quickly, eyes wide as she saw the destruction. She ran to Tom, hugged him, then turned to look at Dorothy's house. Oh my God, Karen whispered. How? Tom didn't answer. He just kept staring at the house as if it were a mirage that could vanish at any moment. Other neighbors began to arrive, one by one, families returning to assess the damage, and one by one they all stopped and looked at Dorothy's house. The murmuring began softly, then grew. Look at that house. How is it possible? Not a single scratch. That's Mrs. Miller's house. A crowd gathered in front of Dorothy's home. 10 people, 15, 20, all staring, some with tears in their eyes at the sight of their own homes destroyed, others with faces full of pure disbelief. It was Mrs. Margaret, a frail old woman who lived on the corner, who finally broke the silence. It's a miracle, she said simply, her voice heavy with her thick accent. There's no other explanation. It's a miracle. Tom opened his mouth to protest, to offer some kind of rational explanation, but nothing came out. Because what could he possibly say? That it was luck? That 20 houses were destroyed and one remained untouched by pure coincidence? Even he wouldn't believe that. Dorothy, Tom finally said, his voice low, May I come in? Dorothy nodded and climbed the porch steps. Tom followed her, Karen too, and then a few more neighbors. The living room was exactly as it had always been, simple, clean, modest. And in the corner, upon a small dark wooden table, stood the image of the Virgin Mary. Tom walked toward it slowly. He stood before it, staring. Karen came closer to her husband and took his hand. Tears rolled silently down her face. My whole house, Tom whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Everything we built, it's gone. But this house I said would be the first to fall. He turned to Dorothy. There were tears in his eyes, too. I mocked you. I said your Virgin Mary couldn't protect you from the wind. Dorothy stepped closer and gently placed her hand on his arm. You were worried about me. There's nothing to forgive. But I was wrong, Tom said, his voice breaking. I was completely wrong. He looked back at the image. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, awkwardly, Tom Richardson, the man who didn't believe in God, who called prayer a waste of time, knelt down. He said nothing. He simply knelt before the image, his head bowed, his shoulders trembling. Karen knelt beside him. A few other neighbors did too. Others stood silently, just watching, trying to process what they were seeing. Throughout the day, more neighbors came. Some prayed, some just stood quietly, some cried, not only for the loss of their own homes, but for something deeper, something they couldn't quite name. Dorothy made coffee. She served the cookies she had saved. She offered her home, her space, her peace. And the image of the Virgin Mary remained in the corner, serene as it had always been. But maybe, just maybe, there was something different about it now, or perhaps it was only the light coming through the window in a certain way. Dorothy would never know for sure. And honestly, it didn't matter. 2 weeks later, the street was buzzing with reconstruction. Construction trucks came and went constantly, hammers pounding, saws cutting. The sound of life returning to a place that had been devastated. Tom and Karen were rebuilding. Most of the neighbors were too. Some had decided to leave. The memory of the hurricane was too much to bear. But Dorothy's house remained exactly the same. She still woke up at 6, still had coffee with toast, still watered her plants, still prayed at 3 in the afternoon before the image of the Virgin Mary. The difference was that now she was often not alone. Karen had started visiting her every Tuesday. They would have tea together, talk, sometimes pray. Mrs. Margaret started a small prayer group that met at Dorothy's house every Thursday evening. It began with 3 people, then 7, then 15. And Dorothy? Dorothy remained Dorothy. Kind, quiet, humble. She never bragged about what had happened, never drew attention to herself. When people asked about the house, she simply smiled and said, "I prayed, and the Virgin Mary heard me." Some people believed her. Others thought it was luck. Others searched for scientific explanations. Perhaps. But no one could fully explain it. Because when all the maybes and probablys and coincidences were added up, it still didn't make sense. One afternoon, 6 months after the hurricane, Tom knocked on Dorothy's door. She opened it and smiled. "Hi, Tom. Come in. I just made some coffee." But Tom stood at the doorway, not stepping inside. Then he said, "Dorothy, there's something I've been wanting to do, but only if you let me." "What is it?" "Your house needs repairs. The roof is old, the paint is peeling, and the electrical wiring must be at least 30 years old. I know it survived the hurricane, but I'd like to fix it up. For free?" Dorothy started to protest, but Tom raised his hand. "Please, let me do this." Dorothy looked into his eyes and saw genuine sincerity. "All right," she finally said, "but on one condition." "What's that?" "When you finish, you come here for coffee every week. You, Karen, and the kids." Tom smiled. "Deal." And so, over the next 3 months, Dorothy's house went through a complete renovation. But the little table in the corner of the living room, the one with the image of the Virgin Mary, that was never touched. It remained exactly where it had always been, serene, protected. And every afternoon at 3 o'clock sharp, Dorothy knelt before it and prayed. Because Dorothy knew something not everyone understands. Faith is not about getting what you want. It's not about bargaining or negotiating with the divine. Faith is about trust, about surrender, about saying, "Thy will be done," and truly accepting whatever comes. Dorothy had asked for protection, and she received it in a way she could never have imagined. And in the end, perhaps that's what really matters, not whether the miracle happens, but whether you have enough faith to ask for one. And if you were to ask anyone on that street what really happened the night of the hurricane, each would give a different answer. Some would say it was a miracle. Some would say it was impossible luck. Some would say there are things in the universe we simply cannot explain. But everyone would agree on one thing. Something happened in that house, something real, something that changed not just a wooden structure, but the hearts of those who witnessed it. And maybe in the end, that's the true miracle, not that the house remained standing, but that people learned to kneel. And look, now, if you've made it this far, to the end of Dorothy's story, do one thing for me. Write in the comments, "Blue House." The color of the house that stood when everything else around it fell. I want to see how many hearts this story has truly reached. And every time I read that number in the comments, I'll know that one more person believes that miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Write in the comments about a miracle you've witnessed or experienced, and share this video with someone who needs to renew their hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue to bless and protect you and your family. Amen.